Every evening, when the sun sinks behind the old train tracks of a small countryside station, a man sits alone on the same wooden bench. He carries a single white carnation in his hand and a faraway look in his eyes, as though his soul is waiting for something his body has already forgotten. He has been coming here for 30 years. Same time. Same place. Every evening. The station master once said, he comes at 6, sits until the last train leaves, and then quietly walks back home. Never boards, never waves, never misses a day. No one really knows his name anymore. Some call him the stranger who waits. Others whisper that he once loved someone who never returned. But no one asks. They just pass by, watching his stillness the way one watches a monument, curious, but from a distance. His name is Ethan Miles. And this story is what time did to his waiting. Back in 1979, the world moved slower. The trains still screamed with steam, the tickets were stamped by hand, and the air smelled of coal and rain. Ethan was 23, a railway mechanic, honest hands, tired eyes, and a heart that believed in forever. One evening, on his way home from work, he boarded the 4:15 train and sat beside a woman reading a book by the window. The cover said Wuthering Heights. She looked up once, smiled politely, then returned to her page. When Ethan asked if the story was sad, she replied softly, "It's not sad. It's honest." Her name was Clara Bennett, a librarian from the next town. They talked the whole ride, about books, music, and how silence between two people can sometimes say more than words. When the train stopped, she stood, smiled, and said, "Maybe next Sunday?" And he, caught between surprise and hope, simply nodded. They met every Sunday after that, same seat, same time. He brought coffee, she brought stories. They watched the countryside slide by like a slow-moving dream. Sometimes they spoke for hours, sometimes they said nothing. It didn't matter. Some silences feel like home. By November, their hearts had already promised what their lips hadn't. That evening, Clara looked nervous. She held his hand and said, "Next Sunday, meet me here. I have something to tell you." Her eyes shimmered with something he couldn't name, joy, fear, maybe both. Then she boarded her train, waved once, and disappeared into the golden horizon. Ethan spent the entire week replaying her words. Maybe she was going to say yes. Maybe she was finally ready for him to meet her father. Maybe this was the beginning of everything. Sunday arrived, bright and windy. Ethan wore his best shirt, bought her favorite magazine, and held a single white carnation, because she once said they looked like hope. He sat at the bench early, heart racing, watching the clock. The 4:15 arrived. Doors opened. Faces passed. But she wasn't there. He waited for the next train. Then another. By midnight, the platform was empty except for him and the echo of his own heartbeat. The next morning, news spread of a landslide on the Northern Line. Several carriages had gone off track. No survivors confirmed. Clara's name wasn't on any list. Her body was never found. Ethan refused to believe she was gone. "She promised," he said quietly to the station master. "She told me she'd meet me." And so, he kept his promise too. He came back the next day. And the day after that. And then every evening for the rest of his life. Years turned quietly like pages in an unread book. People came and went, the world changed. Ethan didn't. In summer, he wore a light coat. In winter, too. Sometimes he brought crumbs for pigeons, sometimes a newspaper he never opened. Always the flower, always the bench. At first, people pitied him. Then they forgot him. He became part of the scenery, like the rusty clock, the squeaking rails, the sigh of a departing train. Children grew up hearing the legend of the waiting man. Tourists pointed at him, snapping photos from a distance. But Ethan never looked at them. His eyes stayed on the tracks, steady, gentle, patient. A reporter once approached him in the mid-1990s, curious to know his story. She asked, "Why do you wait, sir?" Ethan smiled faintly and replied, "Because some arrivals take longer than others." She asked if he believed she would return. He said, "Belief isn't the word. It's memory that refuses to fade." The article was printed under the title "The Man Who Waits for Forever." It became famous for a week. Then the world moved on again. But Ethan didn't read newspapers. He was still at the bench. Decades passed. His hair turned silver, his hands trembled, but his eyes stayed the same, calm, expectant, kind. He had grown old without realizing it. Then, in 2009, the station announced renovations. Workers began clearing the old lockers that hadn't been opened in decades. Most were empty. One wasn't. Inside, wrapped in a brittle newspaper, they found a small envelope. The name written on it was E.M. The handwriting was faded but unmistakable, looping, delicate, like someone who wrote with feeling. It was Clara's. The letter was dated March 3, 1979, the day before the accident. With trembling hands, Ethan opened it. "Ethan," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I left sooner than I wanted. My father's being transferred north. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd try to stop me. But please, wait for me one last time, not at the platform, but at the hill behind the station, where the wildflowers grow. That's where I'll find you. Love always. Clara." The paper smelled faintly of lavender, even after 30 years. He pressed it against his chest and whispered, "You kept your word, Clara. I was just in the wrong place." That evening, for the first time in 3 decades, Ethan didn't sit on the bench. He walked to the hill behind the station, where wildflowers still grew through the cracks of forgotten stones. The sun was setting. The sky looked like it was on fire. He sat down and closed his eyes. The air smelled of rain and old memories. He whispered, "I'm here now. You can come." A soft breeze passed over the hill, gentle, almost human. Some say they saw an old man talking to the air, smiling like a boy. Others say they saw nothing. But that night, Ethan didn't return home. The next morning, the station master found him there. Sitting peacefully, eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips, and a white carnation resting on his lap. The letter lay beside him, dry despite the morning dew. The coroner wrote heart failure. But the townsfolk said, he finally boarded his train. After his passing, the bench at platform 3 was left untouched. Every morning, someone found a fresh white carnation placed on it. No one ever saw who left it. Some believe it's the wind. Some say it's the station staff keeping his memory alive. But once, a traveler claimed that on a foggy dawn, he saw 2 silhouettes standing by the bench, an old man and a young woman, hand in hand, disappearing into the mist as the first train arrived. Maybe love never really leaves. Maybe time bends for certain promises. Maybe some stories are too strong to end. And if you ever pass through that small station on a quiet evening, you might notice the empty bench at platform 3, facing the sunset. Sit there for a while. Listen carefully. You'll hear the whisper of wheels on track, the sigh of distance, and somewhere between the sounds of arrival and departure, you'll hear 2 hearts finally finding their way home. Because some promises are never broken. They just take a lifetime to keep. They say time heals everything. But some wounds never really close. They just grow quiet enough to live with. And sometimes, the apology you've been waiting for arrives long after the person who owed it is gone. This is Maya's story. And the letter that changed everything. It had been raining since morning. The kind of rain that doesn't roar or rage, but simply falls. Like the sky is quietly remembering something it can't let go of. Maya sat on her porch, barefoot, a mug of untouched tea cooling beside her. In her hands, a single envelope. It was thick, aged slightly at the edges, sealed carefully. Her name written across the front, in a handwriting she knew better than her own. Her father's handwriting. The postmark on the top corner said 3 months ago. But her father had been gone for 2 years. Maya stared at it for a long time. Her mind whispered excuses. Maybe it was a mistake. A letter lost in the system. A mix-up. But deep down, she knew. It was from him. And whatever it contained. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. Her father had always been a man of order. A quiet, precise soul who believed that emotions were better kept folded neatly away. Like the shirts in his dresser. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't warm either. He was simply distant. He loved routine, not conversation. Structure, not surprise. And when her mother died, the man who raised her slowly disappeared behind a wall of silence. He stopped joining her at the dinner table. He stopped saying goodnight. He stopped speaking at all. They lived together. But the house was hollow. Like two shadows moving past each other. Bound only by grief. When Maya turned 20, she packed her things and left. No fight. No goodbye. Just silence. The same silence that had raised her. 4 years, she built a new life in a new city. A place where no one knew the weight she carried. And for a while, she believed she had escaped it. Then came the phone call. "I'm sorry," the nurse said softly. "Your father passed away this morning." Maya felt nothing. Not pain. Not relief. Just a quiet emptiness. That felt too familiar to notice. She attended the funeral. Stood by his grave. Listened to people call him a kind man. And wondered if kindness could exist. Without words. Afterward, she went home. And didn't look back. 2 years later, on a rainy Thursday morning, the letter arrived. No sender's name. No return address. Just her name, Maya. In that same steady, thoughtful script that had once signed her report cards and grocery lists. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The paper crackled softly. The ink slightly smudged. Inside was a single page and a lifetime of unsaid words. "My dear Maya, if you're reading this, it means I never found the right moment to say goodbye. I was never good with words. Maybe you noticed. After your mother died, everything in this house became quieter, even the clock seemed to tick slower. I thought silence would protect us both from the pain. I was wrong. Every time I looked at you, I saw her. The way she smiled. The way she spoke. The way she made everything lighter. It hurt too much to look at you, Maya, because loving you meant remembering her. So I hid behind work, behind routine, behind silence. I thought I was protecting you from my grief. But all I did was bury you inside it. You deserved better. You deserved a father who held your hand when you cried. I'm sorry I couldn't be that man. In the attic, there's a small wooden box. You painted stars on it when you were 8. Inside are the letters I wrote to you every birthday after you left home. I never mailed them, I didn't think I had the right to. But they're yours. They always were. Please don't remember me for my silence, Maya. Remember me for trying, even when I didn't know how. Love. Dad. Maya sat still. The rain outside had softened to a whisper, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Her fingers brushed the paper like it was something sacred. Tears filled her eyes, slow, quiet, unforced. It had been years since she had cried for him. She closed her eyes. And for a moment, she could almost hear his voice. Steady, gentle. The voice of a man who finally found the courage to speak. That night, she went up to the attic. The air smelled of dust and time. Boxes stacked like forgotten memories. And in the far corner, a small wooden chest. Paint chipped. Stars still faintly visible beneath the years. Inside were 13 envelopes. Each labeled in his handwriting. Happy birthday, Maya, year 1. Year 2. Year 3. And so on. Her breath caught in her throat. She opened the first letter. It was clumsy, funny, even. You're 21 now. I hope you're eating properly. I made your favorite cake today. It didn't rise. Like me, I suppose. She smiled through tears. The next letter was gentler. The third one, warmer. By the fifth, he wrote about how proud he was of her new job. By the eighth, he wondered if she'd ever forgive him. And by the last one, his handwriting trembled. If this is the final one, then let it be enough. I loved you, Maya. Even when I couldn't show it. Even when I didn't know how. That love never broke, even when I did. Maya sat surrounded by the letters. Her father's words filling the room. Like a voice carried through time. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive. Warm. Understood. She stayed there until sunrise. Reading and rereading every word. When the first light touched the attic window, she walked outside, holding the letters against her chest. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear. And for the first time in her life, she whispered into the morning air, I forgive you. Sometimes love doesn't arrive when we need it most. Sometimes it travels slowly, through silence, through guilt, through time itself. But when it finally reaches us, it heals the parts we thought were gone forever. Because love delayed is not love denied. It's love finding its way home. The last letter from my father, written for those who still wait for words they never received. They say a mother's love is the closest thing we have to forever. I never really understood that until forever became the only thing I had left. Every night, I light a candle. A small one. Nothing fancy, just a simple white candle that sits by the window. I light it at sunset and let it burn until dawn. It has burned through storms, through winters, through all the long years I spent waiting for my son to come home. His name is Daniel. He was 17 when he left, old enough to dream, too young to understand how heavy the world can be. He told me he wanted to see life, to go beyond our small town that smelled of rain and pinewood, to find himself somewhere far away. I smiled that day, even though my heart quietly cracked open. Because that's what mothers do. We smile so our children can see courage, even when fear is sitting right beside us. The day he left, the sky was overcast. He hugged me quickly, like he was afraid to linger. He said, Mom, I'll call you when I reach the city. I nodded. And as the bus drove away, I noticed something strange. The candle I had left burning in the kitchen window flickered suddenly, as if the flame itself had gasped. That was the first night I couldn't sleep. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. At first, the phone calls came often. Little stories, small laughter, new friends. Then slowly, the calls stopped. He said he was busy, working, studying, building a life. I believed him. Until one day, even those small messages stopped coming too. It's strange how silence can be louder than sound. At first, I kept checking my phone every hour. Then once a day. Then once a week. But no call came. No letter. No word. People told me to move on. That boys grow up, that they forget to call home. But a mother knows when something is wrong. One night, after months of waiting, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen. Rain was falling outside, and I felt a coldness deep inside me, a kind that no blanket could fix. I saw the unlit candle on the table, half burned from the last storm. Something inside whispered, light it. So I did. And I made a promise, until my son returned, this candle would never go out. That was 6 years ago. Since then, I've lit a candle every single night. Sometimes I buy them from the store. Sometimes I make them myself, melting the remains of the old one into a new shape, because that's what hope is, isn't it? Taking what's left and shaping it into light again. Neighbors talked. Some called me foolish, some called me faithful. But I didn't care. that candle became more than a ritual. It became a prayer. A quiet conversation between a mother and the universe. Each night, as the flame trembled, I would whisper softly, "Wherever you are, Daniel, find your way back to this light." There were days I almost gave up. Like the winter when the electricity went out for weeks and I had to burn bits of old wax and scraps of wood just to keep the candle alive. Or the year I fell ill and could barely get out of bed, but still, I lit it. Because if faith is measured by endurance, then a mother's faith is infinite. One evening, the wind howled harder than usual. I watched the flame struggle, dancing wildly in the draft from the cracked window. For a moment, I thought it would die. My heart clenched, as if the world would end with that small light. But then, it steadied. Just like that, it stood tall again. I remember whispering, "That's my boy." Years passed. Seasons changed. The world moved on. But I didn't. Every night, the candle burned. Every night, I waited. People asked me, "What if he never comes back?" And I would smile, tired but sure, and say, "Then this candle will keep guiding him home, even if it takes forever." Then one evening, something changed. It was raining again, like it always seemed to on days that mattered. I sat by the window, staring at the flame. The wax had melted down low, and I thought, maybe this will be its last night. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. A soft, hesitant knock. For a second, my heart froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there he was. Daniel. Older, thinner, a beard on his face, a scar above his eyebrow, but those eyes, they were still my boy's eyes. He stood there in the rain, trembling, a duffel bag over his shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice broke. "Mom," he whispered, "you kept it burning." I didn't say a word. I just reached for him, pulled him close, and held him like time itself had paused to breathe. I could feel his heart beat against mine, proof that love had survived distance, silence, and years of not knowing. He cried that night, not the tears of a lost child, but of a man who finally found his way home. Later, as we sat by the candle, he told me everything. How he had lost his job, how shame kept him away, how he thought he'd disappointed me beyond forgiveness. He said that one night, when things were at their worst, he dreamed of a light, a soft, warm glow that wouldn't fade. He said, "I woke up and remembered your candle, Mom. That's how I knew I had to come home." That night, the flame burned steady, brighter than it ever had before. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. The silence that used to haunt me now felt like peace. The waiting that used to ache now felt like proof that love never stops burning, no matter how long the night lasts. Now, every evening, I still light the candle. Not because I'm waiting anymore, but because it reminds me of what faith can do. That little flame taught me more about life than any sermon, any book, any prayer. It taught me that sometimes, you don't need to chase miracles. You just need to keep the light alive long enough for them to find their way to you. When people pass by my window now, they smile and ask, "You still light that candle?" And I say, yes. Because hope doesn't retire. Some nights, when Daniel visits, he sits with me in the glow of that small, faithful light. We don't talk much, we just sit quietly, listening to the soft hum of life moving on. And every time I see the candle flicker, I think of all the nights it kept burning for him. For us. For love that never gave up. Sometimes the light we keep for someone else ends up saving us, too. Because love, real love, never truly goes out. The rain began before dawn, soft, uncertain, as though the sky itself was waking up after a long dream. Outside the window of a small wooden cottage on the edge of a forgotten village, a woman sat still, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, eyes fixed on the horizon that no longer held the person she once called home. Her name was Alara. Every morning, before the world stirred, she would open the old window and whisper into the rain. No one knew what she said, not the postman who sometimes passed by with letters no one wrote anymore, nor the children who peeked through the fog hoping to see the rain lady. But she knew, because every drop that fell carried something of him. Years ago, this cottage was full of laughter. Elara and her husband, Jonas, had moved here after the city became too loud, too fast. They wanted peace, a garden, a porch, and time. Jonas painted, and Elara wrote small poems no one ever read. Then one day, while fixing the fence, Jonas collapsed. No storm, no warning. Just silence. He was gone before the ambulance reached the village. The next morning, it rained for 3 days. Elara stood outside, drenched and trembling, staring at the clouds as though they had taken something from her. Since then, she had spoken to the rain every morning. Some days, she asked it to carry her love to him. Other days, she asked it to tell her why. One morning, nearly a decade later, the postman left a small brown envelope on her doorstep. No sender, no address. Just a simple note inside, in a handwriting she hadn't seen since the funeral. If you ever find the courage to come back to the sea, I'll be waiting by the pier. J. Her hands shook. Jonas had grown up by the sea. Before they moved to the mountains, he often said, "When I die, scatter me where the waves can still speak." But Elara never went back. She couldn't. The letter had no explanation. No one could have written it, not him. Yet the paper smelled faintly of salt, like sea air trapped between folds of time. That night, she didn't sleep. The rain came again, steady and patient. And for the first time in 10 years, she whispered something new, "If you're still listening, I'll come." The next morning, Elara packed lightly, a shawl, a notebook, and Jonas's old compass, its glass cracked, still pointing nowhere. The bus ride to the coast took 9 hours. She hadn't traveled in years. Outside the window, the landscape changed from green to gray to the deep blue shimmer of sea beyond the fog. When she arrived, the pier looked the same: weathered wood, rusted nails, seagulls crying above a lonely horizon. She walked slowly, her hand brushing against the railing, her heart beating with memories she had tried to bury. At the end of the pier stood a man, old, gray, but somehow familiar. When he turned, she gasped. He wasn't Jonas. But he looked like him, or rather, like a painting of him grown older, faded at the edges. The man smiled kindly. "You must be Elara," he said. "I've been waiting." She froze. "Waiting? Do I know you?" He nodded toward a small easel beside him, covered with a cloth. "Maybe not me. But he wanted you to have this." He pulled the cloth away. It was a painting of the cottage, bathed in rainlight, and in the window, a woman's silhouette holding a cup, looking out. The signature read, "Jonas, 2015. Her breath caught. He never finished this." The man nodded. "He did. He left it here for you. I was his friend. He asked me to keep it safe." That night, she stayed by the sea. It rained again, heavier this time, relentless. She stood beneath it, eyes closed, the painting beside her. And as the thunder rolled far away, she felt something strange, not sadness, but quiet warmth. She could almost hear him in the rain. Not words, not whispers. Just presence. "I kept my promise," she murmured. "I came back." The rain answered with soft rhythm, like a lullaby written by the sky. When dawn came, she placed the painting at the edge of the pier and whispered, "If this is where you rest, let it stay." Then she turned back toward the village. Elara returned to her cottage a week later. The garden was overgrown, the porch damp, but it felt different, lighter somehow. She no longer spoke to the rain asking why. Now, she spoke as if sharing, telling it how her days were, what she planted, what she dreamed. The villagers still called her the Rain Lady, but her voice no longer carried sorrow, only calm. Years passed, and one spring morning, a traveler stopped by her cottage. He found it empty, door open, chair by the window, a half-filled cup on the table. Outside, it was raining. The traveler said he heard something, a woman's laughter, soft as mist, echoing between the drops. He looked toward the hills, and for a moment, he could swear he saw her silhouette, standing in the rain, face turned upward, smiling. There are people who move on by forgetting. And there are others, like Elara, who heal by remembering. She never stopped missing him. But she stopped letting that ache define her. Because sometimes, love doesn't end. It simply changes form, from hands we can touch to rain we can feel. And maybe, just maybe, the rain still carries her whispers to him. Sometimes, going back home isn't about finding what's there. It's about facing what you left behind. For Daniel, that truth waited on a long, quiet road, leading to a town that time had nearly erased. He hadn't been back in 20 years. Not since the day his brother, Michael, died. The drive felt endless. The cracked roads, the ghostly trees, the sound of wind brushing through forgotten houses. It all felt familiar, but distant, like a dream that had faded in the morning light. The old bakery was gone. The church bells were silent. And yet, somehow, the air still smelled the same. Like dust and rain in summers that never seemed to end. When Daniel finally stopped the car in front of his childhood home, he just sat there for a moment, watching the house as if it might breathe again. The white paint had peeled. The green shutters hung loosely. And weeds had taken over what used to be their garden. But behind all that decay, he could still see it. The laughter, the warmth, the days when the world was small and kind. Inside, everything was covered in dust. The same creaking floors, the same quiet air. On the hallway wall, faint pencil lines still marked the years when his mother measured their heights. Michael, 10. Daniel, 8. He traced the names with trembling fingers. And for a moment, it felt like his brother was still right there beside him. Barefoot, smiling, saying, "Let's go, race you to the river." They were inseparable back then. Two brothers, one dream, to see how far their bicycles could take them. Michael's bike was bright red, shiny, fast, and loud when it hit the gravel. Daniel's was blue, smaller, always a few steps behind. They used to race through the fields until sunset, throwing stones into the river, making promises they never thought time could break. But time has a way of breaking everything. One summer evening, Michael didn't come home. The next morning, they found his bicycle, bent, broken, near the old bridge. A car had lost control. The rest of the world kept moving. But Daniel stopped that day. He was 15. He stopped riding. Stopped laughing. Stopped coming home. Now, 20 years later, he stood again in that same backyard. The same old shed, its wooden door swollen from years of rain. It creaked as he pushed it open. And there, beneath a torn tarp and a blanket of dust, something red shimmered faintly in the light. He pulled it free, and froze. Michael's bicycle. The paint was faded. The metal rusted. The wheels crooked. But it was unmistakable. The air left his lungs. His hands trembled as he brushed the dust away. And he whispered, "Hey, Mike." Then, for the first time in decades, Daniel cried. Not the loud kind of crying. The quiet kind, the kind that carries 20 years of silence. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in the old living room surrounded by fading photographs. His parents, long gone. His brother, forever young. The house creaked around him like it remembered every heartbeat that once filled it. And somewhere deep down, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. The need to fix something. Not the house. Not the memories. The bicycle. The next morning, he found his father's toolbox. He wheeled the bicycle out into the sunlight, sat beside it, and began to work. The chain squealed. The bolts resisted. His fingers were cut and rust-stained. But he didn't stop. Because every screw tightened felt like stitching a piece of his brother back together. Hours passed. The sun fell behind the hills. And when he finally stepped back, the red paint, though scarred and dull, still caught the evening light. He smiled through tears and said softly, "You'd laugh at me for this, wouldn't you, Mike?" A gentle wind rustled the trees. For a second, he thought he heard a whisper. Just a faint echo of laughter carried through the air. The next day, Daniel did something he never thought he would. He climbed onto the bicycle. It wobbled under his weight. The tires cracked, the pedals stiff. But he pushed anyway. The first few feet were shaky. Then the wind met his face. And something opened inside him. The road blurred. The sound of wheels against gravel. The smell of rain and soil. For a moment, he was 15 again. And ahead of him, in the sunlight, he could almost see Michael, turning back, shouting, "Race you to the bridge." Daniel stopped at that bend. The same place where it had all ended. He stood there quietly, looking at the river below, the water glistening in gold. He whispered, "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back." He stayed until the sky turned orange. Then he left the bicycle by the bridge, standing tall against the fading light. Not as a grave, not as goodbye, but as a memory, returned to where it belonged. Days later, a local boy found it. He said it looked old, but special. He rode it once around the field, and swore he heard laughter following him. The townsfolk never touched it again. Every spring, they cleaned it, planted flowers around it, and called it the bicycle of brothers. They said it was a reminder that love doesn't rust, and some stories never end. They just wait to be remembered. Years later, Daniel's daughter visited the town. She saw the bicycle still standing there, its red paint now kissed by time. She took a photo and sent it to her father. Moments later, he replied, "Just one line. Tell him I finally caught up." And somewhere, between the wind, the river, and memory, two brothers rode again. Through sunlight. Through time. Through the kind of love that never fades. Sometimes, fate doesn't announce itself. It just waits quietly, between seconds, between heartbeats. In the tiny moments we never notice, until they stop. For Elena, that moment was 11:11. She used to make wishes whenever she saw that time. On her phone, on her clock, even on old train station boards. She'd smile softly and whisper, "Just one more good thing." But she never imagined that one day, the clock itself would answer. Elena lived in a small coastal town, in a house that faced the sea. The waves were her lullaby, and the wind through the curtains felt like an old friend. She restored antique clocks for a living, each one with its own story, each one ticking its own heartbeat. Her favorite piece sat on the shelf above her desk. A brass mantel clock, shaped like a half-moon. She had found it at a market years ago, dusty, cracked, its hands frozen at exactly 11:11. Something about it felt different. It didn't need to work to feel alive. One evening, while cleaning the workshop, she noticed something strange. As the light dimmed, the frozen clock began to glow faintly. Not bright, not artificial, just warm. She thought it was a reflection at first, but then she heard it. A tick. Just one. Then another. The clock, silent for years, began to move. And the hands trembled, both settling again on 11:11. Her breath caught. The sound was so soft, so rhythmic. Like it was matching her heartbeat. And then, From somewhere behind her, a voice said, "You fixed it." She turned and saw a man standing by the window. Tall, gentle eyes, the kind of face that felt familiar even if she couldn't remember where from. He looked at her with quiet recognition, not surprise, not fear. Like he had been waiting. Elena froze. Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "You used to wait for me here." The air grew still. The clock ticked louder. His name was Adrian. At least, that's what he said. He spoke softly, like someone who knew every echo in her house. They talked, cautiously at first, then as if they'd known each other forever. He told her about the sea, about the storms, about promises that time couldn't erase. And each night, when the clock reached 11:11, he would appear again. Always for the same minute. Always with that gentle smile. Elena began to wait for that moment every evening. Not to make a wish, but to keep a promise she didn't yet understand. Weeks passed. The clock became her anchor, and Adrian her secret. He never aged, never changed, and never stayed beyond that 1 minute. One night, she asked, "Why only at 11:11? He looked down at the clock, then at her. "Because that's when everything stopped." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "The night you wished for 1 more minute." Elena's mind spun back to that stormy night years ago. The night she had stood on the pier, waiting for someone who never returned. A car had crashed near the bend. A man had died instantly. She had made a wish at 11:11. Please, just 1 more minute. And somewhere between time and memory, someone had heard her. The next evening, she couldn't stop staring at the clock. Her heart raced as the hands began to move. 10:59, 11:00, 11:01. She waited. And when it reached 11:11 again, he appeared. Like a shimmer of memory, standing in the doorway. Tears filled her eyes. "You're real, aren't you?" He smiled. "As real as you made me." He reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. His touch warm, fleeting, electric. But before she could speak again, the clock struck 11:12. And he was gone. The days that followed blurred together. She stopped answering calls, stopped opening her shop. Every night, she just sat in front of that clock. Waiting. People in town whispered that she'd gone mad. But love, the kind that bends time itself, doesn't care for reason. Then one night, she made a choice. At exactly 11:10, she held the clock in her hands. Its ticking echoed like a heartbeat, faster, louder, alive. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If he's a memory, then let me remember forever." The hands began to shake, violently this time. The glass cracked. Light spilled through the cracks. Golden, soft, like morning sunlight. The clock struck 11:11. And she was gone. The next morning, the townsfolk found the door to her workshop open. The chair empty. And the clock, perfectly still. Its hands frozen again at 11:11. But now, inside the glass, faintly reflected, were 2 figures. A woman and a man, standing together, smiling. No one could ever explain it. Some said it was just a trick of light. Others swore they heard a faint ticking every night. Right at 11:11. Years later, a new owner moved into the house. He found the same clock, cleaned it, and placed it on the mantel. Every evening, when the light dimmed, he noticed something strange. For 1 minute, the air felt warmer. And somewhere, softly, 2 voices whispered, "Make a wish." Because sometimes, love doesn't end when time does. It just finds another minute, and waits for 11:11 to begin again. It was the kind of road that didn't appear on maps anymore. Long, cracked, forgotten. A road that didn't lead anywhere, except away. When Claire drove down that road, She wasn't sure if she was escaping something, or heading toward something she hadn't yet met. Her car hummed with the soft rhythm of exhaustion. No music, no radio, just the low sigh of the wind slipping through the open window. After the funeral, the house had felt too big. Too full of her husband's laughter that still clung to the walls. Too empty of his warmth that used to greet her every morning. So, one morning, she just left. No note. No plan. A small suitcase. A photo. A journal. And the road, waiting. Hours passed. The sky turned gold and quiet. And then, she saw it. A suitcase. Just sitting there. At the edge of the road. Old. Brown. Weathered by time and distance. Like someone had left it there years ago and never came back. Claire slowed down. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she stopped. She stepped out. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and dust and something faintly sweet, maybe wildflowers. For a long time, she just stared at the suitcase. Strange, she whispered. Who leaves something like this here? It wasn't locked. The handle was smooth, worn from hands that had held it many times. When she lifted it, it felt almost empty, as if it carried more memories than belongings. She hesitated. Then slowly, she opened it. Inside, neatly folded, were old clothes, a small notebook tied with string, and a faded photograph of a young couple standing at a train station. The man was smiling. The woman looked away, shy, uncertain. And behind them, barely visible on the wall, were words written in chalk. For those who travel far enough, the road remembers. Claire sat down on the grass, the suitcase open between her knees. The last rays of sunlight spilled over the photo, turning its edges to gold. Something about the woman's eyes, the curve of her smile, felt familiar, like she was looking at a younger version of herself. She untied the notebook. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting delicate, almost trembling. Day 1, we left everything behind today. Maybe that's the only way to begin again. Day 12, the roads aren't as empty as they seem. Every mile holds someone's story. Day 31, she said she wasn't sure where we were going. I told her, neither am I. But I'd rather be lost with her than found alone. Claire closed the notebook, her throat tightening. Whoever these people were, they had carried love across the miles. And somewhere along the way, they disappeared. She spent the night in her car, the suitcase beside her. The moon rose pale and silent, painting the world silver. She dreamed that night of a road looping endlessly into the stars, and a voice whispering, "You're not lost, Claire. You're just remembering where you started." When she woke, dawn spilled across the sky like a slow fire. She felt lighter, as if the road had begun to breathe with her. Later that morning, she stopped at a small diner in a quiet town. An old man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "You're not from around here," he said kindly. Claire smiled back. "No, just passing through." He nodded, until his eyes caught the suitcase beside her. His expression changed. "That suitcase," he said slowly. "Where did you find it?" She hesitated. "By the old South Road. Near the fields." He sighed, eyes softening. "That's been missing for years." He pointed to a booth near the window. A couple used to sit there. Every summer. One coffee, one tea. Said they were traveling the country together, collecting stories. Then one year, they didn't come back. Their car was found by the river, at the end of that same road you mentioned. When Claire left the diner, she didn't feel afraid. She felt guided. That afternoon, she reached the river. The water was still, clear as glass. The air was cool and quiet. And there, nearly hidden beneath vines and tall grass, stood an old wooden sign. It read, "End of the road." Claire sat by the water, the suitcase beside her. She opened the notebook again, near the end. One final page. Day 43, the river's ahead. She's tired. I told her we can rest now. Maybe the road never really ends. It just changes names. For a long time, Claire sat there. The sound of the river and the wind became her silence. She realized the people who had written those words weren't lost. They had found something she'd forgotten how to look for. Peace. She smiled faintly. You made it, she whispered. Then she opened her own bag and pulled out the photograph of her husband. She placed it inside the suitcase, beside the couple's picture, and closed the lid. Maybe it's your turn to rest too, she said softly. She left the suitcase at the river's edge, where the earth met the water. When she walked back to her car, she didn't look back. But as she drove away, the sun dipped low, turning the world gold. And in her rearview mirror, for just a moment, she thought she saw two figures standing by the riverbank, hand in hand. And beside them, the suitcase. But when she blinked, they were gone. Only the reflection of the sunset remained. Months later, Claire settled in a small coastal town. She began to write again, stories about places that remember. Stories about the things we leave behind. And the ways they find their way back to us. Sometimes, when she drives at night, she takes roads she doesn't know. Roads without names. And when she feels the wind in her hair, she smiles. Because somewhere deep inside, she knows the road remembers her too. Sometimes, the road doesn't lead us home. It teaches us what home really means. When Simon inherited the house, he thought it was just an old building. A gift from an uncle he barely remembered, tucked away in a sleepy town miles from anywhere. The house sat on a hill, its silhouette dark against the morning mist. Vines clung to the walls like memories that refused to let go. Windows stared blankly, dust-coat, hiding the stories that lingered inside. Simon had always been practical, a man of numbers, schedules, and plans. Haunted houses weren't his type of story. Yet as he stepped onto the creaking porch that first morning, something whispered, something almost alive, that he was no longer alone. The front door resisted at first, the old lock groaning like a sigh from decades past. Once inside, the air was thick, rich with the scent of aged wood, old paper, and a hint of lavender. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Simon wandered from room to room. The living room was lined with shelves of faded books. A cracked mirror reflected a face that looked the same, and yet not. Dust motes danced in the sunlight filtering through tall, curtained windows. He found a journal on a small oak table near the fireplace. Its pages yellowed with age, filled with handwriting he didn't recognize. Today, I placed the last frame on the mantel. The house seems to remember even what I have forgotten. Simon frowned. Remember? He whispered. It sounded absurd. A house that remembered? The first night, he slept in the main bedroom. At first, all was quiet. Then, just past midnight, he awoke to faint murmurs. Not voices from outside, not from a neighbor, but from the walls themselves. The murmurs grew clearer. Snippets of conversation, laughter, arguments, moments that had never belonged to him. And then a child's laughter, soft, joyful, echoing from the hall. He rose, heart pounding, and wandered down the corridor. The sound seemed to guide him, pulling him toward a small door in the corner of the house. Behind it, he found an old nursery. Toys scattered across the floor, a rocking chair slowly moving, though no one was there. A music box played faintly, its melody fragile and incomplete. On the wall, pictures hung crookedly, families that had lived here before, faces smiling, children growing up, grandparents fading away. Simon felt a chill, as if he were walking through the very memory of the house itself. Over the next days, Simon explored every corner. Every room held whispers of lives long gone. Their joy, sorrow, and secrets etched into the very wood and stone. In the library, he opened a book that fell open to a random page. It described a man who had once lived there, arguing with his wife about a lost letter. Simon held his breath. The story matched exactly a tale his grandmother used to tell him, one she never shared with anyone. The house was remembering, not just holding memories, but replaying them. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Simon found himself in the attic. Stacks of trunks and boxes, each containing letters, photos, and keepsakes. A worn diary sat atop a trunk, and he opened it. I fear this house remembers too much that I see the past reflected in every corner, and sometimes it feels as though the walls watch me as I sleep. He realized then that this house wasn't haunted by ghosts, but by memory itself. And memory can be more vivid, more painful, and more comforting than any spirit. Night after night, the house revealed more to Simon. Moments of laughter from children he had never met. Quiet heartbreak from lovers separated by distance and time. Even celebrations, birthdays, weddings, and quiet, tender evenings. All preserved in the very essence of the home. Simon began to leave notes for himself. Each day, he would record what he saw and heard, hoping to understand this strange phenomenon. He realized the house didn't just remember, it wanted to be understood. It wanted the lives it held to be witnessed, honored, and perhaps carried forward. One rainy afternoon, Simon discovered a photograph tucked inside a drawer. It showed a young boy holding a puppy, with a woman standing behind him, smiling softly. Something about the photograph made Simon's chest ache. He couldn't explain why, but he felt connected, as if a thread had tied him to the house, to the memories it had preserved. Weeks passed. Simon slowly stopped fearing the whispers, the moving shadows, the fleeting laughter. Instead, he began listening. He watched, observed, and sometimes even spoke aloud. "I see you," he would whisper to empty rooms. "I remember too." And in return, the house seemed to respond. Faint glows of light appeared in dark corners. Doors would gently close after him, as though acknowledging his presence. It was no longer a house filled with strangers' memories. It had become a home, not just for Simon, but for every life it had held, every story it had preserved. One night, after a storm had passed, Simon sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, soft and gentle. He realized something profound. Memory is not just in our minds. It can live in places, in objects, in walls. It waits for someone to see it, to witness it. And in that witnessing, it survives. The house had taught him patience, empathy, and the fragile beauty of every human life. Simon finally understood why he had inherited the house. It wasn't just a property. It was a legacy. A bridge between past and present. A reminder that life, in all its fleeting moments, can echo forever if someone is willing to listen. As he walked through the rooms one last time that evening, Simon spoke softly. "I will remember you. I will honor you. I will carry your stories forward." And in the silence, the house seemed to breathe. A warm, gentle sigh of acceptance. He stepped outside into the cool night. For the first time in years, Simon felt completely at peace. He looked back at the house on the hill. Its windows dark but alive with memory. Somewhere deep within, he knew. The house would always remember. And now, so would he. Sometimes, the past is not meant to haunt us. It is meant to remind us that every life leaves a mark. And every story deserves to be remembered. Ethan had always believed that some mistakes could never be undone. That some doors, once closed, could never open again. Life, he thought, had a way of reminding us that we cannot outrun our past. He had spent years in quiet regret, walking through life carefully, almost silently, as if the weight of his mistakes might crush him at any moment. Yet, on a rainy morning in late October, everything changed. The letter arrived at his small apartment, sealed with old-fashioned wax. No return address. Just his name, written in a careful, unfamiliar hand. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to let the past remain buried. But something, a faint glimmer of curiosity, or perhaps hope, compelled him to open it. Inside was a single line. "Meet me at the bridge, where we began and where we can begin again." Ethan's heart skipped. The bridge. He hadn't thought of it in years. Not since that day, that terrible, terrible day. The journey to the bridge was quiet. Rain-slicked streets reflected the gray sky, and the city seemed almost empty, holding its breath. Ethan's mind raced with memories he had tried to forget. A friendship broken, a promise betrayed, a moment that had changed everything. When he arrived, the bridge stretched across the river like a silver line. Half hidden by fog, half shimmering in the muted morning light. And there, standing at the far end, was her. Clara. He had not seen her in 10 years. Time had altered them both, yet somehow. She was exactly as he remembered, strong, quiet, but with eyes that had once trusted him completely. Ethan took a step forward, then another. Memories flooded him, the laughter, the arguments, the promises. He wanted to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Clara did not move. She simply waited, hands clasped together, as if the bridge itself held them suspended between past and future. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said softly, voice trembling. "I almost didn't." Ethan swallowed hard. I had to. I needed to see, if it's possible, to make things right." The rain had softened into a gentle drizzle. Ethan reached the middle of the bridge. They were close now, yet a lifetime seemed to stretch between them. Clara's gaze was steady. "Do you remember what happened here?" she asked. He nodded. "Every second." "I've carried it too," she admitted. "Every day, every night. I thought maybe, some bridges are meant to burn, but—" She trailed off, looking down at the flowing river below. Ethan followed her gaze, feeling the current pull at something deep within him. Something he had buried under guilt, shame, and years of silence. Slowly, carefully, he reached out his hand. She hesitated for the briefest moment, then took it. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a sudden fix of the past. It was acknowledgement. It was recognition of everything they had lost and everything they could still regain. They stood together on the bridge, watching the water carry leaves downstream. Ethan felt the weight of regret begin to lift, replaced by a fragile, trembling hope. "I've wanted to say this for so long," he whispered. "I'm sorry. Truly." Clara's hand squeezed his. "I know," she said. "I've wanted to hear it too. And maybe it's time to let go." The minutes stretched, timeless and gentle. Raindrops glimmered on the surface of the river like tiny stars. And Ethan realized something profound. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about acknowledging it, facing it, and choosing to move forward anyway. "Do you think we can start over?" he asked. Clara's eyes softened. "I don't know," she said. "But perhaps we can build something new, together. The bridge is still here. And so are we." Ethan exhaled, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. The mistakes still existed, the pain still lingered. But they no longer defined him. He looked down at the flowing river. The bridge beneath their feet seemed to hum with quiet understanding. As if the world itself approved of second chances. Of moments where courage meets hope. They talked for hours, sharing the years they had lost. The fears that had kept them apart, the small joys that had survived anyway. No one else was there. No one else needed to be. The bridge had become more than a place. It had become a symbol of what is possible when we dare to face our past. As the sun broke through the clouds, a warm golden light bathed the bridge. Ethan felt the tension inside him finally unravel. He turned to Clara and smiled, a small, tentative smile that held everything he had carried for a decade. "Thank you," he said softly, "for waiting and for forgiving." Clara returned the smile, and for the first time, Ethan felt the past and future meet in the present. They were no longer defined by their mistakes, but by the courage to step forward together. The bridge between yesterday and tomorrow wasn't just a place. It was a choice, a promise, a path toward redemption and the fragile, beautiful possibility of starting again. Sometimes, the past cannot be changed, but we can change the way we meet the future. And perhaps, that is enough. In the heart of the mountains, nestled between jagged cliffs and rushing rivers, lay a village that time had almost forgotten. Once full of laughter and life, it had been abandoned after a great flood destroyed homes, fields, and the dreams of its people. For years, no one dared return. The buildings crumbled, and the fields lay fallow, claimed by weeds and wild grass. And yet, amidst the silence, one man returned. His name was Armin. A simple man with calloused hands and a heart full of purpose. Where others saw ruin, he saw potential. Where others saw despair, he saw hope waiting to be unearthed. Armin arrived at the village in the early morning, carrying only a small bag of tools and a notebook filled with plans. He surveyed the empty streets, the collapsed houses, and the broken bridges. He could have walked away. No one would have blamed him. But something inside him would not let him. He chose to stay. The first days were the hardest. Walls had fallen, roofs had caved in, and the river had washed away much of the land. Every step was a struggle. Every stone lifted felt like a mountain conquered. Yet Armin persisted. He cleared debris with his bare hands, salvaged wood and stone wherever he could, and began the slow, painstaking process of rebuilding. At first, the villagers thought he was mad. Who could possibly rebuild a village alone? They asked. But Armin only smiled and said, "One brick at a time. One day at a time. That is all it takes." Weeks turned into months. The sound of hammering echoed through the mountains, and slowly, walls rose again. Roofs were patched. Paths cleared. Where once there was silence, there was now the rhythm of labor and hope. Armin worked from dawn until dusk. Rain did not deter him. Cold did not deter him. Even when exhaustion threatened to break him, he reminded himself, "This village has a heartbeat, and I am merely helping it breathe again." He did not seek recognition. He did not ask for thanks. And yet, slowly, people began to return. Some came to watch, some to lend a hand, and some simply to marvel at what one determined man could achieve. Children laughed in the streets again, their voices bouncing off the newly rebuilt walls. Families planted gardens, repaired old wells, and painted their homes with fresh colors. The village, once dead, began to thrive. Armin, however, never stopped working. He continued to mend, repair, and rebuild. His joy was not in applause or praise, it was in the quiet satisfaction of seeing life restored. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Armin sat on a bench he had built himself. The village lay before him, warm lights flickering in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, and laughter echoing in the air. A young girl approached him, holding a small basket of wildflowers. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving our home." Armin looked at her, his eyes misting. "I didn't save it alone," he replied. "The village saved itself, one heart at a time. I only helped guide it along the way." Days turned into years. The village flourished, a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of a single determined heart. Armin grew older, his hands roughened by work, his hair touched with silver. Yet he never wavered, never faltered. The village had given him a purpose, and he had given it a future. And in that exchange, something extraordinary happened. The story of one man's perseverance inspired others far beyond the mountains. People traveled from distant towns to see the village that had risen from ruin. They carried the tale back to their own homes, planting seeds of hope and courage wherever they went. Armin's legacy was not in buildings or walls. It was in the hearts of the people, in the laughter of children, in the fields that once lay barren. He had reminded the world of a simple truth. One person, with courage and persistence, can change the lives of many. Years later, sitting on that same bench, Armin looked out over the village one last time. The river shimmered in the sunlight. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children ran freely through streets alive with joy. He breathed deeply, feeling the weight of time and the reward of resilience. "This is enough," he whispered to himself. "This is why I never gave up." The mountains held the village in a protective embrace. And Armin knew that as long as hope lived in the hearts of people, nothing could ever truly be lost. Sometimes, the world may seem broken, and the weight of rebuilding may appear too great. But courage, persistence, and love can restore what was once lost. And one determined heart can inspire many, leaving behind a legacy that time itself cannot erase.